Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Content Patch, or should I say welcome back to the Content Patch after a week hiatus, unfortunately required due to work commitments, I'm afraid. Now I'm back to the other work, which is this. This is of course the 27th of May 2013, I'm of course TotalBiscuit, as I have been for quite some time, and I'm bringing you your daily dose of gaming news and comment. Coming up on the show, Xbox One, all of it. I know, I'm late to the party on this one, but at the end of the day, it had to be said, did it not? Yes, it did. So this entire show will be dedicated to Xbox One, based on both the conference and the information that has come out since. So, let's get to it. Microsoft has unveiled what appears to be their new home console. It goes by the name of Xbox One. I say the term appears because, curiously enough, the conference was more focused on its ability to watch television than it was to actually play games. In fact, while Microsoft mentioned a rather large bevy of exclusive titles coming your way for the Xbox One, they neglected to show most of them, revealing only 2 and showing gameplay from Call of Duty Ghosts, which is of course a multi-format release. Instead, the hour-long conference hosted by Microsoft focused primarily on the ability of the machine to actually be a multimedia center for your living room, with lengthy descriptions and demonstrations of how the device could seamlessly switch between television, Skype, movies, as well as gameplay. The approach in itself all binds together to take this philosophy that this is an all-in-one device, and as a result is capable of controlling pretty much everything in your living room. Interestingly enough, it didn't really describe what exactly it controlled aside from your television, and indeed what else would actually be in the living room to begin with. Indeed, rather than controlling living room devices, it seemed to do the opposite, give you the ability to control the device using your living room devices, such as, say, a smartphone or a tablet, something that is of course already possible due to Microsoft Smart Glass with the Xbox 360. So, let's break it down, shall we? Let's talk about a few things. So, firstly, the thing about the Xbox One is that it's doing things that either previous consoles have already been able to do, just in a slightly fancier way, or trying to take over the role of current smart TVs. Now, if this device was announced a couple of years ago with this kind of functionality, then it would be a fairly exciting prospect. Let's be frank. If you have a lot of devices plugged into a television, it can become a bit of a pain in the arse to control them all. However, in recent years, there have been several innovations that have gone towards unifying the devices in the living room. For instance, I have a couple of televisions in the house. One of them can actually link up directly to my PlayStation and allows me to use the remote to control the PlayStation itself, which is in itself a little bit crazy. It actually has a directional pad, it has a couple of buttons, and as a result I can navigate both. It will automatically switch to the PlayStation when the PlayStation turns on, or I can press one button to go back to the television. Useful piece of functionality there. Of course, it is a Sony TV and a Sony PlayStation, so perhaps that is to be expected. I also have a Samsung Smart TV downstairs, and that allows me to utilize a wide variety of different functionality, including motion and voice control, and also the Blu-ray player integrates quite nicely with it, so that there is very little mucking about required in order to actually use that. In fact, there's an awful lot of devices that will now simply switch over automatically as soon as you turn them on, which is a fairly useful thing to do. If you turn on your Xbox, naturally you want to use your Xbox, so the television detects that and switches over. The idea of hub-based content management, for instance. The fact that you don't simply want to flick through channels, you want the channel guide integrated, which will allow you easier access. You want access to stuff like Amazon Instant Video, Netflix, Crackle, Epix. You want access to the internet, you want access to Skype. You want all of that in a convenient hub, a smart hub, which is exactly what is part of the Samsung series of smart TVs that has been there for the past couple of years, and my television has that. It also, of course, has the integrated webcam, so it can do pretty much all of those things in a fairly effective fashion, and there are several other makes of television which enable you to do that. Now, don't get me wrong, these televisions are right now fairly expensive. A Samsung Smart TV of a decent caliber and size will set you back a couple of $1,000s at least, and I would say that getting an Xbox or just any kind of device that provides that functionality to an older television is a cost-effective way of getting that functionality. The question, I suppose, has to become, exactly who wants that functionality and how much they're willing to pay for it. More to the point, are they willing to pay for a device that apparently focuses upon that versus what you traditionally buy a games console for, that being video games. The notion that there's a big focus on live TV, to me, is extremely curious, and we're noticing a time when cable subscriptions are actually falling. For perhaps the first time in history, there is a bigger focus on video-on-demand content. Netflix is getting more popular than ever. Several competing services such as Hulu and Amazon Prime Instant Video are coming into play. The notion that you can stream a high-definition movie legally directly through a device such as an Xbox, a Wii, or indeed a lot of televisions. Both of my televisions have direct Netflix and Amazon Instant Video support. That comes native with the devices, and one of my TVs is several years old, and yet had that functionality anyway, not to mention the fact that it can actually play Flash video, YouTube, and pretty much everything else. So this is not new tech. The idea that you would focus very much on live television when you're supposedly trying to aim for a gamer audience is very odd indeed. And in fact, it's very revealing of the intended demographic of this particular device. Now, if you were to look at the conference itself and its particular focus, there are a couple of characteristics that spring to mind. Who likes Call of Duty and sports? Who is into both of those things, both sports gaming and live sports watching? Who are the kind of people that like fantasy football and actually want that to be integrated into your TV? Who are the kind of people that want to be able to call up their friends and brag about their imaginary football team? Yeah, dude bros, basically. It's all about the dude bro demographic. That is the kind of demo that it's aiming at. If you think it's aiming at a family, then I have to ask, how exactly? If you want to talk about a device that really aims towards the family, then you talk about the Wii U for the most part. That has functionality which is genuinely useful to the family when it comes to sharing a device downstairs. Let's be honest, most people don't have televisions in every room of the house, and if they are in the same room, which they more often than not are, then sharing the device is very important. The ability to play a game while watching a television show is a very useful piece of family functionality, even though it doesn't seem to be overly pushed or utilized in the Wii U, yet you don't really have that function with the Xbox One. In fact, the Xbox One seems to be very focused on a single person. The idea that you can utilize Skype, for instance, to talk to people that aren't in the room with you. Not a very useful piece of functionality if you're all around the television. Why would you need Skype there? That simply interrupts the television program. Why would you want to call someone up while watching TV? You can only hear one of those at a time. One interferes with the other, which is in itself a very strange thing indeed. Not to mention, the emphasis on Skype is a very odd thing, considering that Skype is integrated into almost every device in the house, including some refrigerators. Like, this is not a difficult program to get. Pretty much every smartphone that comes with every contract has access to Skype. Every tablet has access to Skype. Every laptop or netbook or ultrabook or computer, and indeed a lot of smart televisions, all have Skype access. So the focus on Skype is a very odd thing indeed. And what really gets me is that they didn't at any point try to tie it into gaming. There are useful pieces of functionality involved in this. Like, you might think that voice chat is already integrated into consoles, right? And you're right, it is. But having a private Skype call can actually be more useful. It allows for cross-platform stuff, potentially. Of course, there was no mention of that actually ever happening, and who knows if it ever will, but a Skype call can be more useful than in-game voice chat. It can often be of higher quality. The notion that you can even see your friends and your teammates in-game via the actual webcam interface, because this thing apparently supports group calling, could be useful, potentially, as long as it doesn't overwrite too much of the screen. But there was no mention of any of that. It seemed, in fact, like the integration of Skype is something that was a checkbox on the list of stuff that this thing should have, rather than something that was put in there for any deliberate use. And why? What's the point? To call up to brag about your fantasy team? I mean, in theory, the kind of people that you would be competing with in fantasy football would be on the couch with you. Isn't sports supposed to be a social activity? And yet, it seems like Xbox One is driving it further and further away from being a social activity that you enjoy on your couch. All of this functionality the Xbox One has is not conducive at all to the traditional sports experience. So I can't really imagine why this was pushed. If you're going to push it towards dude bro gamers and people that are really into sports, you're talking about college dorm stuff, right? Surely. The kind of time when you sit together with your bros and you watch and you drink natty ice and whatever it is these kids do these days. But I just don't get it. What is it for? What is the point in this? One major thing that we should also bring up is the fact that you're talking a lot about ESPN-based content and things like that. Most of the stuff isn't available outside of the US, so not only are you completely alienating a large chunk of your audience there, but you have them questioning exactly whether or not this device will be worth it for them. If this is a big focus and you're spending a lot of money on these partnerships and this functionality, then why would I buy a console for potentially higher price? Because, let's be honest, consoles in the UK as well as in Australia, indeed Europe, are almost always more expensive than they are in the US on launch. Why would I pay more for less? What functionality is available for me? A lot of this stuff you can't even get, so what kind of regionalization are you going to do? What kind of localization will you do? What kind of additional services will be available? Will I have integration with Sky Sports, for instance? No idea. Will this kind of functionality be available for sports other than American football, which most of the world isn't interested in? Again, no idea. The whole thing just confuses me greatly, and I think there's a couple of ways you can look at it that sort of explain the mindset. One being that they don't feel that they can actually compete with the PlayStation 4's announcement in terms of raw appeal to core gamers, so they didn't try. They already know that they have a less powerful console. Now, there is of course evidence that suggests that the system itself will actually be a full 50% more powerful in terms of its actual GPU. Basically, it has more raw shader performance. It's simply a case of 768 SPs at 800 MHz performance there for the Xbox One versus 1152 SPs at the same megahertz rating performance. Bear in mind that the architecture of these systems is reasonably similar, more so than most consoles, mostly because they both rely on the AMD Jaguar APU. So you can do a more direct comparison versus, say, the 360 versus the PlayStation 3, which are radically different architectures. That's not good news. That's not a good start out of the gate. If Microsoft knew that this was the case going into this and were basically caught by surprise with their pants down on this, then yeah, they may very well have chosen to focus on the televisual aspect of things because they didn't actually want to compete with Sony. They wanted to compete with Apple for control of the living room. That's what they're looking to do with this, as far as I can tell. Unfortunately, Sony has such positive PR rolling forward now, and all this conference has managed to do is significantly amplify that. They have done a huge favor to Sony by not focusing on the games. There's a few other things to consider when it comes to the performance as well. A lot of people have talked this up, but it's very hard to really determine exactly what's going on with it. The difference between Ddr3 and Gddr5, now, there is the assumption that Gddr5 would just be flat out better. It's not how it works. Gddr5 doesn't work in the same way. It's not like it's just a faster version of DDR. That's not the case at all. The architecture is very complex to explain, but it's difficult to compare the two based on how they're actually doing things. Do not assume that Gddr5 is somehow a performance increase. That is really not how it works. It has a higher bandwidth potential for the memory, but it doesn't have as good latency, doesn't have as tight timings as DDR3. Honestly, it's very difficult to know really what's going to be happening there, and I don't understand enough of the technology to really go into that. Here's the problem though, and this is from a Eurogamer article which indicates that Microsoft was confident that they would be launching with twice the RAM of the PlayStation 3. As in, they knew about the Gddr5, they didn't know about the 8 gigs of it. They were confident that it would only launch with 4. Indeed, initially, the PlayStation 4 was only supposed to have 2 gigs of this stuff, not 8. Developers didn't know about that either. So this was very much a surprise to everybody. So as a direct result, Microsoft went for a different approach. However, it seems like they may have lost out as a direct result of that. That could very much, in combination with the better shader performance of this machine, kill them in the long run. That could happen. Very much could. So you can definitely see why there wasn't such an emphasis on the hardware. They skipped over a lot of it. They didn't really talk about anything meaningful. 5 billion transistors and talking about the Kinect using photons. This is meaningless, Drek. This is FUD. It doesn't mean a damn thing. However, I should emphasize this. Performance doesn't mean a damn thing either. You might think that the most powerful console wins the day all the time, right? No, that really is not the case at all. If we look at some of the previous console generations, we look at PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox. Xbox was the most powerful machine, yet did not sell as much as the PlayStation 2. In certain aspects, not all of them, but in certain aspects, bearing in mind that console architecture is radically different, very hard to compare, the GameCube actually outperformed the PlayStation 2, and yet it was the worst selling of the three. One could also argue, of course, that the Wii was very clearly inferior to the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, and yet ended up actually shifting more units regardless. Performance doesn't really mean all that much. What is important is getting the exclusives and getting the installed user base. The question, I suppose, then becomes, how do you get that? Can you get the installed user base with a focus on television and functionality, which is really quite strange? I don't really know that you can. As I said before, these features are things that are not new. They already exist. My television can do motion control just like a Kinect can. Not as good, but it can do it. And it can also do voice control, very similar to how the Xbox One apparently can do it. I can do all of that stuff already, and that's becoming more and more common as we go. Not to mention the fact that there are phone apps that allow you to do exactly the same thing, use your phone as a remote, and so on and so forth. Is that a very attractive concept? I guess it really depends on whether or not it captures the public's imagination. It might. It very well might. I know about all this stuff because I have a high-end TV and I'm also fairly technologically savvy. A lot of people don't know about this, and the idea of being able to control your television with your voice and switch back and forth between various pieces of functionality, have it recognize you via the face and control your favorites list and things like that, that is potentially attractive. It just depends how it's actually marketed. And as a direct result, while to core gamers this conference was an absolute disaster, one of the worst I've ever seen, and I've watched a lot. Man, I watched the Konami conference from several years ago. That was dreadful. Holy crap. Was that guy on drugs? I have no idea. But this was one of the worst. It was also one of the dullest and most boring games console reveals I have ever seen. Yeah, you could just feel the souls of the journalists there collectively dying. And the weird thing, I suppose, is that why would you open with all of this stuff that's not really aimed at gamers when the only people that are going to watch your conference are gamers? They're the only people that are interested in this. Nobody from your apparent demographic, the one that you seem to be shooting for based on these features, is interested in your dumb conference. They're not going to watch that. So what kind of impression did you expect? Now, here's the follow-up, right? They claim that a lot of the gaming stuff will be revealed at E3. Kind of makes sense, but why start yourself off on the wrong foot when your opponent has so much going for them in terms of the positive PR that's backing it, yeah? They've got a powerful machine, they showed a lot of games, they've clearly got plenty of first-party exclusives, a lot of functionality that's looking really, really good, and they don't have all of these awful rumors following them around. Let's go down the list, shall we? And let's also look at the updates. The first one, the idea of used games on the Xbox One. So, the current line of thinking, which has not been confirmed or denied by Microsoft, I might add, which, again, is something they really should nail down right now and get it clear and out in the open, is the idea that publishers will be receiving a cut of Xbox One pre-owned sales at retail. Who on earth they've partnered with for that, I really, really do not know. Who would have possibly agreed, and more to the point, what kind of pressure would they have to be put under? Now, according to MCV, which is a trade magazine in the UK, they're looking at a system where key retail partners would be giving a large chunk of change to the publisher and developer themselves under Microsoft terms and conditions. Now, as a direct result, there are even claims that the percentage cut given to the retailer would be as low as a few pounds. Yeah, so about $5, $6 at most. £3.50 is what they're currently looking at for that, which is in itself kind of crazy. They're looking at taking the sort of very, very base value of a used game and throwing £35 onto it that would end up going to the publisher and the developer, leaving about £3.50 for your average profit margin on a used game. That's actually kind of intense. Now, Major Nelson won't confirm or deny the bloody thing. He says the ability to trade in and resell games is important to gamers, blah, 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 guff, guff, guff. It is designed to support the trading and resale of games. Reports about our policies for trading and resale are inaccurate and incomplete. We will disclose more information in the future. Of course, the bad thing about this is he doesn't flat out deny it, which means that there must be some truth to it. They've got to be planning something, and I would love to know what that is. Now, I am going to be completely frank here. This may put me as one of the 1%, or maybe it just means that I'm a PC gamer, but honestly, I've never really seen the right to sell pre-owned games as kind of a thing. I know a lot of people do believe in the rights of the owner, saying when you buy something in a box, it is basically yours. And this also ties into the notion of lending games to people. You will not be able to do that directly. Everything has a license code, which also ties into the always-on rumors, which have apparently been confirmed as phoning home every 24 hours rather than being always on, which is mildly better but not by much. And this lack of control that people are bemoaning is not necessarily something that, certainly over the last few years, I've found all that important. And I think it is because I am almost exclusively a digital-only PC gamer. So everything I buy, I never believed for an instant that I had the right to either loan it to somebody else or sell it to somebody else, because none of the systems in place allow me to do that. So it's something I've kind of gotten used to, and in return, we get a lot of really cheap stuff. We get those deep discounts. These systems actually support those deep discounts because there is no possibility of those games actually being resold. And that's also the reason why you don't get those massive deep discounts on console games. Even via their digital medium, you're still not seeing those huge sales and 75 to 80% plus off recommended retail price sales. It just does not happen. Now, I know a lot of people buy used games, and there was a time in my life when I bought a lot of used because I just didn't have the money, right? And I get that. I do. I really, really do. But I also get that developers and publishers should at least have some right to something from used game sales, and it's simply because retail has pushed such a massive culture of used games. It's not just a case of occasionally someone will sell a game on eBay, or they'll sell it to their friend. That's not the problem. The problem is that there are entire massive multinational retailers that have built a business on selling huge quantities of used games for a massive profit margin. That is the reason why this is happening. You want to blame someone for this? You look right at the games and the GameStops and even to some degree the supermarkets for this kind of stuff. That is why this is coming into play, because there are millions of copies sold this way. It has become a booming industry that is not benefiting the developer in any way, shape, or form, and arguably is actually doing exactly the opposite. These are shops that will actively, and having worked at them, I know this for a fact, they will actively push the sales of used games over new ones. They will try and sell you a used copy every time you bring a new copy there. You should know how many used copies are there, and you should offer them the alternative, always. Always at the counter. So you are actively denying these new sales. And you're working against the very people that are keeping you in business. No wonder this system is in place. So, this to me is not a huge deal. I don't like the idea that you can't loan a game to someone, but they are saying that you will be able to play your game on someone else's system if you are logged into your account at the time. So if you want to play a game with your friend, you can go over to their house, you can log into your account, and you can do it. You can't loan them games for weeks at a time. Again, I don't see that as being a big problem. There was not some massive undercurrent of this that was really killing game sales. It's a casual thing that you sometimes do between friends. There is not a huge industry built upon it. So to me, that seems unnecessarily draconian. And I feel that you are going to eventually harm yourselves by doing that, because being able to loan a game to a friend is generally a good way to also get them to buy it. They get to try it for a little while, and like, yeah, okay, I want to buy my own copy because I want to get involved in the multiplayer, or so on and so forth, yeah? That is a good thing, yeah? That actually takes some of the risk out of being a consumer. So I don't necessarily agree that that is a very good idea whatsoever. Now, let's talk about the Kinect. Good lord, the Kinect! I've always hated this bloody device. It clearly does not have any practical purpose. It is very much a gimmick and has resulted in precisely one good game being made for it that isn't a dancing game. That game, of course, being the Gunstringer. I mean, you could argue that Child of Eden qualifies as well, but it really doesn't, because that was also a PlayStation move, so it wasn't designed for the Kinect in mind. But the Gunstringer is probably the only good Kinect game that I know of that isn't a dancing game. It is not designed with core gamers in mind. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. Whenever you try and make a core game on that system, like, oh, I don't know, let me think, Steel Bloody Battalion. Whenever you try and make a core game using that system, it doesn't work. It, in fact, is the exact opposite of working. A colossal failure. I mean, basically Kinect just killed Steel Battalion as a potential franchise. A game which, quite frankly, I would have liked to see more of. What a joke. Now they claim they have more accurate controls and so on and so forth. But what they also claim is that this thing is mandatory. So to follow up on the idea that the Kinect is mandatory, Xbox has officially said that this is true. Microsoft has said that the Kinect is mandatory. Quote, directly from the UK marketing director Harvey Eagle, Kinect does require to be connected to Xbox One in all cases, yes. As whether the Xbox One will accommodate people who perhaps play in their bedroom rather than the living room. Yes, absolutely, we use the living room almost as a moniker. That's where we assume the best screen is in the house, but if you'd like to play in any other room in the house, the Xbox One will deliver the same quality of experience whatever the environment. Really, because the first Kinect certainly didn't. The first Kinect required a fairly large room. You want to talk about college dorm rooms, they're basically cells. And they really, really are. And can you fit a Kinect and then actually have it work properly? That would be an impressive advancement on the original technology. And more to the point, this thing is always on. You can't unplug the bloody thing. Not only that, but of course it's going to add to the cost of the machine. A Kinect was not a cheap device. When Kinect first came out, it was certainly over $100 for this thing. So if you're going to incorporate it with the machine, it has to be mandatory, then you have to ship it with the machine, because you can't use it otherwise, which means that you increase the cost of the system while not providing any real tangible performance benefit to the people that are playing on it. So unless you go for a massive loss lead with your system, you end up with a weaker system that's the same cost as something like the PlayStation 4. I mean, there's where you could really get an advantage, right? Your system is less powerful, so sell it for less money. Great, you suddenly get an edge. Does it really matter to anyone other than the big hardcore core gamer? Not necessarily, and maybe those guys are playing on PC anyway, but because of the cost of this bloody thing, it will push that price up. And to what end? The ability to swipe through content? I have a controller. I am pretty adept at using it, as it turns out. I don't want to shout at my television, it's weird. It's really odd. I don't even use the voice control on my television because the remote is perfectly useful for that. Not only that, but you have Smart Glass, which enables you to do it easier anyway. On a smartphone, a device that you already have. So what is the point? It'll recognize faces. No longer do you have to log in and out of profiles. This took like 5 seconds. This is a bunch of very expensive technology solving minor problems. These are not issues that actually affect all that many people. Not only that, but you then have massive privacy concerns. Even if you don't use this bloody thing to monitor the room or anything along those lines, how many people do you really think are gonna believe that you wouldn't? Don't get me wrong, I think a lot of people are overreacting saying, oh, what if it takes pictures of me naked and posts them on the internet? It's not going to do that. How to expose Microsoft to a gigantic lawsuit 101. What it will probably do is be used for a couple of different things that are a little bit more insidious. Now, we talked about this a few months ago, the rumors that this thing could be used to detect how many people are in a room and actually adjust license or renting fees accordingly depending on the kind of content that you're watching. It's like, oh, there's 5 people in the room, so you gotta pay more for a piece of content like a rented movie or a television show. But what seems to be more likely is the idea that this thing can regularly scan and figure out who exactly is in your house and send you ads that are appropriate to that. We already know that Xbox Live will be incorporated, and Xbox Live already does in fact contain a large amount of advertising, which is kind of crazy considering you pay for it. Now, as far as we know, Xbox Live on the Xbox One will not be free, so once again, you pay for the right to use the stuff that you could have used on any other machine, including basic laptops and netbooks, for free. It is the only system on the market that does that. Even Apple doesn't do that. And Apple would love to, no doubt. They would adore that very notion. But no, you can use the internet for free, you can play multiplayer games for free on every other system that isn't the Xbox. And if this Kinect system is not used to get demographic information and target ads towards you, I would be extremely surprised. There are already very insidious and completely legal ways of doing that with basic web browsing. It would not surprise me at all if this system was able to do that. And again, what bloody use is the Kinect to core gamers? There isn't one. We don't use voice commands. Generally, voice commands are extremely inefficient, and don't get me wrong, as much as I would like to believe that this thing is latency free, I don't. You can talk to me about photons all you damn well please, but it would not surprise me in any way if it was unreliable. Even the highest tech voice recognition stuff is unreliable. I have a really good smartphone. It has that voice recognition. It still gets it wrong half the time. I mean, if my phone can't get it right, and it's brand new tech that is specifically designed around that, I don't trust you to be able to do it while there's a lot of noise going on in the room. Let's say I put in a surround sound system, I try to yell at my console to do something which is it's time sensitive, right? If my phone gets it wrong, I just do it again. If I order my squad mate to do something and it doesn't do it, then I can die in the game immediately. Which is why voice commands are generally not used in that respect. It's a really bad idea. It's unreliable technology. If I want something to do something, I press a button because I know it will respond. Oh. It's turned into a rant. I didn't want it to be. I really did not. But this conference was just horrible. Now, if I want to talk about one positive thing, it's probably the controller. That actually looks really nice. I really like the look of it. I like the fact that they've moved the Xbox button up to the top there. It makes it less easy to hit it accidentally. That's always good to see. It looks like the actual analog sticks they look really premium. Like the rubberized grip around the side, very, very nice. Look like they're concave as well, which is always good. The triggers look good. The buttons look good. I am really looking forward to using the Xbox One controller on my PC. That sounds like a great idea. They've even improved the D-pad, which was, of course, one of the worst parts of the Xbox controller. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to picking one of those up and using one of those for my PC. Sounds like a great idea. Unfortunately, until we really get to see the games, then it's very hard to comment on what this thing is actually capable of doing. What we saw, which included Forza, as well as Quantum Break. I don't even know what that is. I know it's a Remedy game, which is a definitely positive thing, but is it integrated with a television show like Defiance? How the hell is that working? They never explained that. And then you got Call of Duty, which is a multi-platform release. Great. I'm not going to go into that. Everyone's already done the joke about the dog and the fish and the god beams that are coming from the wrong place and the technology and leaning and just, it's not even worth it. It's not even worth my time or your time to even speculate about. But as I said about stuff like the Wii U and about pretty much every console, when all is said and done, you can criticize this machine and this conference all you damn well please, and it doesn't make a blind bit of difference if it's well marketed and if it actually has good games. If it has those exclusives that they're bragging about, and if we see that at E3, and we see that there's a bunch of really good titles coming out for it, great, we'll have ourselves a console war on our hands. We'll have some competition. More exclusives. I mean, we barely have any exclusives anymore between PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It's all multi-platform. For a PC user, of course, exclusives are not that great. We'd prefer, of course, to be able to just get them on our system. But it does tend to spur some pretty nice competition, some innovation, and some really high-quality blockbuster titles. How many will the Xbox have? Well, again, who knows? The last thing I think that needs to be discussed is the fact that Microsoft are claiming they will support the 360 for 5 more years. So I have to wonder about the adoption rate. How quick is it going to be? Will it be quick enough to actually get developers on board and publishers really pushing content for this system? The Wii U has been a disaster in that regard. Slow adoption rate, which is in a catch-22 situation with the fact that no one wants to develop for the bloody thing, but no one wants to buy it, and then no one wants to develop it because no one's buying it, and so on and so forth. That's a really bad situation to be in. Can they pull this off with a more expensive machine? And if this thing isn't at least $400, especially considering it comes with the Kinect, I'll be extremely surprised. That would be very, very shocking indeed. They would be pulling a huge loss on it. Can they get people to care enough? Do people desperately want a new system? We've talked about it a lot. As core gamers, yes, we're crying out for something that isn't 8 years old. But core gamers, let's just be completely frank here, they're not in the majority. And they haven't been for quite some time. So overall, the conference was, quite frankly, a waste of an hour of my time to watch, and all of the news that's come out afterwards has only been negative. There's a lot of confusion. Microsoft are blaming the media for misrepresenting them, but refusing to give any actual information. It's a pain in the arse, quite frankly, to talk about the Xbox right now, and you can fix that problem by being open, honest, and game-focused at your conference. You can do what Sony did, which got them a lot of positive publicity. It really did. They've got a lot of good PR riding on this, and as a direct result, they can continue to focus on games. Yeah? And that leaves it up to Microsoft to say, we've got a better games lineup, and we're not just focusing on this television stuff, even though it seems blatantly obvious that we are, and that's how we opened. You know, that was our first big PR blitz, all surrounding TV, and sports. Things that I, as a traditional core gamer, could not give a toss about. there you go, folks. My current impression of the Xbox One. Let's see if it changes around the time of E3. I'm always open to having my mind changed, but at the end of the day, one can only go on the information that is given by the company themselves, and that seems to be what they want to focus on right now, and that's why I don't want to focus on them right now. Thank you very much for watching, folks. You have been watching the Content Patch, and I will be back, hopefully at a reasonable time tomorrow. We are back on schedule, but we've got one thing. Of course, the OC Remix track of the day. Okay. Well, since we have been talking a lot about the Xbox, let's do a remix from Halo. There aren't actually that many, surprisingly enough, and some of the stuff on OC Remix for Halo is not actually that great. There is a track that I really like, though, because it does take a little bit of a different approach rather than just remaking existing music with worse effects, which is often what happens when you take that iconic theme. Very dangerous thing to do, but there are some artists that can pull it off with an interesting spin. Quite an old track from 2004 here, almost 10 years old now, by an artist called Archimedes, and it's called Halo Fall From Above, and in brackets, You Can't Stop, which is the main Halo theme, but there's a lot of interesting stuff that's been thrown into this. A true definition of a remix here, something quite funky and pretty enjoyable to listen to. Check it out, of course, in the description below this video. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.
Can't stop.